In the first stage, kids are just learning facts. And then when they enter the logic stage, they want to connect those facts. They want to find connections. And economics is all about connecting a whole lot of pieces together. And so it's a great place. The kids are in a great place to learn it. We've developed the methods that allow them to learn it.
Hello, welcome again to another episode of the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who has been working on teaching economics, has been working in many other areas of our economy, and has been looking to help the bright young minds of tomorrow succeed. And it's none other than John Foster. John, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Thank you, Vance. It's so great to be here.
Well, it's really a pleasure to have you on. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, talking about teaching economics, what are the key lessons, and so much more. We'll go through a lot of different things. But before we get into that, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience. So John received his BS in chemical engineering and MBA from LSU and spent 33 years in industry. A lifelong student of markets, he volunteered to teach junior achievement, and through these classroom experiences, developed the Middle School MBA curriculum, which has won numerous national awards for innovation and early learning. His industrial career failed through process engineering, plant operations, business management, M&A, and corporate strategy, finally falling big enough to exit. He took the time to exit at some point. Today, he teaches kids the lowdown on business, economics, and entrepreneurship in hopes that they might fail bigger and sooner. You know, that's one of the big things I've talked about, John, too, is the importance of failure. We have to talk about success, but we've got to learn from our failures, and we'll get into some of those things. But before we get too far, let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do every guest. Why do you do what you do every day?
Well, Vance, I think it kind of comes down to two things. One, because we can. We figured out how to teach these really advanced concepts really young. And since we can, I really feel compelled. I think we have to do it because I don't have to tell you how much ignorance there is in the world regarding economics. And so since we're able to bring this to kids really early in their lives, I just feel it's my mission. It's everything I've done so far in life has been leading up to something, and I guess this is it. So here we go.
And I love it. And oftentimes, I talk to a lot of people on the show and just in general, and there's usually a focus on high school, teaching high school or teaching college, but you may be the first person I've met that really focuses on the middle school, and I think that's just so important to bring them up earlier. I wish I would have had more economics in middle school. I went to homeschool from 7th grade through 12th grade. So I did get some economics, but it was mainly in high school. What brought you to want to focus in more on the middle school compared to other areas or other levels?
Well, when I started all this, I thought it would be high school seniors too that I was teaching. In fact, we developed this really for my kids. They went to a small international school, and so a lot of the parents would pitch in on things. And they asked me to teach economics. And so I had taught junior achievement for a long time. And so
John, real quick, what is that again? What is junior achievement?
So junior achievement is the big dog in business education for kids. It's a 100-year-old organization. They teach, I don't know, I think it's pushing 7 million kids a year around the world. Huge organization. And it's worth knowing that the junior achievement model is that they recruit people from the business world and then have those people come to classrooms and use the junior achievement curriculum to teach kids. So you have this consultant that comes to the classroom and is teaching that curriculum to kids. And so I cut my teeth there. And Junior Achievement is a great organization. But there are a couple of issues about that model. One, the consultant who comes to your classroom is not a teacher. So they don't have necessarily teaching skills. And worse, they don't know all the kids. The teacher in the classroom knows every kid, knows what they already know, knows how fast they can learn new stuff. And so nobody can teach those kids like that teacher who's there in the classroom.
Well, that sounds exciting with the junior achievement and all the time that you put into that sounds, rewarding and productive for a lot of those high schoolers. But what are some of the gaps and the ways that you were able to fill that working more on the middle school part of this?
Well, these gaps involve the fact that you have a teacher who doesn't understand business or economics. And so you have to bring in an outside consultant to teach the class. So what we did was we built tools and methods that were so clear and simple that anybody could understand it. And so as a result, we're able to essentially do a mind meld with the teacher in the classroom. And so we get into, when we're writing curriculum, we're not thinking about the students, we're thinking about the teacher.
Yeah.
And we're getting into his or her head to allow that teacher to convey this material to the kids that they really understand, the kids they know best. And so in essence, each teacher sort of customizes the curriculum a bit for their own classroom. And we thought that, and another thing is that if you have to bring in a consultant, there's a lot of scheduling issues there. And then, oops, I had to go out of town. Oh, we got to reschedule. It's a bit of a headache for the teacher, actually, to make it all happen. And then, of course, the teacher kind of sits in the back of the room passively while the class is going on and, is sort of out of the loop. So what we do is we go to the teacher and we give that teacher tools and methods that allow them to teach the class. And the classes are full of really cool activities. The kids are negotiating with each other. They're pitching companies. They're building parts and P&Ls. They're analyzing pictures. So it's very, very active, but all within a framework of rigorous economics.
Interesting.
And so what that's allowed us to do, we originally thought that we would be teaching high school seniors, but we kept finding out that we could do it younger and younger and younger. And it's so exciting to have a class of 11 or 12-year-old kids and have them be able to talk to you about capital theory and business cycles and things like that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, go ahead.
And so that's how we ended up in middle school. And plus, when you if you talk to the classical educators, they call middle school the logic stage. And what's happening there, the first stage is the I forget, but in the first stage, kids are just learning facts.
Okay.
And then when they enter the logic stage, they want to connect those facts. They want to find connections. And economics is all about connecting a whole lot of pieces together. And so it's a great place. The kids are in a great place to learn it. And we've developed the methods that allow them to learn it.
Wow. Is that the grammar stage? Is that what you call it?
The grammar stage. That's right. That's
okay.
The first
All right. Yeah. Awesome. John, I mean, this all is awesome. And I love it. And I want to dive into this more. But I wonder from your background, because I mean, you've got an MBA, you went to chemical engineering, and you spent some time in the industrial area and looking at business and everything else. Are there certain points in your life? Because I talked to, like I said earlier, talked to a lot of people, and I see that certain points in their life, they can say, well, this happened, and then this connected me, other dots. And I think that's rewarding for people to hear who may be kind of struggling in their career to say what exactly is going on. And they have that entrepreneurship sort of mentality, but they don't know how to use it just yet. But in your career, are there certain instances or tipping points, if you will, use Malcolm Gladwell's points, that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, I think there's been a number of things. One important factor, I think, is I'm a very slow learner. And so I make all the mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
which means when I finally ferret out the right path, it really seems to be the right path. You know, and maybe it's part of coming from the hard sciences. I can't really take something at face value. I have to dig down to the very root and understand it from the beginning. And so, for instance, when I was in grad school, and I was concentrating in economics, I worked for some economics professors doing regression analyses for them for econometrics.
Mm. Yeah.
And some of the it'd be like we'd plot something out and say, well, throw out this data point, throw out that data point. And we're doing things that in the hard science would have you crucified.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be over. And that bothered me. I'm like, this doesn't, okay, I don't know this field, so maybe this is perfectly fine, but it kind of bothered me.
Yeah.
And then as I went along, I kept feeling like I didn't have the whole story. So I kept digging deeper. For my generation, it's often Ayn Rand who opens your eyes to a totally different paradigm. And I read her article, The Roots of War, and it just blew me away because I always assumed that war was just something like the weather that it showed up every generation and a bunch of people go fight it and get killed and then that's that. But in fact, it has a clear mechanism for how it begins and why it happens. And that was such an epiphany to me. And from there, I started digging deeper and deeper into the literature and found Hazlitt and found Mises and and in fact, we borrow very, very heavily from the Austrian school in our models that we use to teach kids. It's so much clearer and simpler than we built a 3D model. For most people, what they're walking, or if they have a model at all, the model that they have in their head is the circular flow diagram.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really a poor representation of how an economy works. It was built by Keynesians to justify Keynesianism, pretty much. And so we've built a model that's, a number of people have tried to have put together various models. Mostly unsuccessfully. Hayek's triangles, and Bambark had concentric rings, but they're very hard to understand. And I think a big piece of the problem was those guys were working with 2 dimensions on a piece of paper. There's only so much you can show, but we have a 3D animated model, so we can bring a lot more information in. We can hide layers and add them back, so we can make it as simple or as complex as we want. And then you can trace with your finger how all the different pieces are connected. So you don't have to be able to juggle 6 different concepts in your head at one time in order to understand the full picture.
Yeah. Do you find that helps it come to life for the students?
Oh, yeah.
I bet.
Tremendously. It's there's nothing new there. We capture land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. But you can just see all the pieces in front of you. So, and then what we do is, since we use we call it Middle School MBA. We use a very broad approach where we're talking about business, economics, and entrepreneurship all together, which is how I think they should be taught. It's over siloed today. Like these guys don't know each other, but they're all so intimately related. And so we start with the big picture model, which is an economy that's made up of millions and millions of businesses, and then we'll zoom into a business and say, let's talk about how this thing works, and then we'll take the business apart, and then zoom back out so you keep everything in perspective.
Yeah.
And so if we want to talk about capital theory, we'll zoom in on some capital and talk about capital and zoom back out. If we want to talk about price structure, we can demonstrate what a price structure is visually. And then you can see how the prices on each side of a business influence their P&L and thus their investments and how that feeds into the capital structure. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful for them to be able to actually see it. That's
Yeah.
how we do so much so fast.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love it because I think we need to bring economics to life a little bit more. I know in my classes that I used to teach at Texas Tech and Sam Houston and some other places, the first 15 minutes of every class, so this is like principles of macro, principles of micro, intermediate macro, stuff like that. I always talked about the economy and like what was actually going on, and connected that with the current events with the actual theory, which we oftentimes don't get today. To your point about things getting siloed, one of the concerns I have about economics and have had for a while is become so mathematical. And math is important to a certain extent, but especially in the upper level economics and everything else, it becomes more applied math than it is economic principles in theory. And I agree with you. I think the Austrian school, and I call myself a free market economist, to where I like different schools of economics, kind of Austrian school, Chicago school. Friedman's my favorite economist. Throw that out there. And then public choice economics with Buchanan, and institutional economics, kind of what Peter Boettke, who's one of my mentors, has called mainline economics. And but I would suggest, kind of like you did, that the best school on principles of economics is the Austrian School of Economics. I mean, it's just there. It's just so revealing to me when you start looking into it. It's subjective value theory and everything else, and the business cycle, the Austrian business cycle model. All these things really make a lot of sense. And I taught it like that in my classes when I was teaching, and still hopefully do some with the podcast and some other stuff that I'm doing. But there's so many good lessons in there that I love how you bring it to life for those kids. Is the middle school MBA, is that something that any school can use? They need to reach out to you to get connected, or how does that process work?
Yeah, any school can use it. Home schools, brick and mortar schools, private schools, public schools. We've got a mix of all of them. All they have to do, you can find everything at middleschoolmba.com at our website. And it's super easy to install. The teacher onboards themselves in like 20 minutes or so. We provide any other help that they need along the way, but it's very rare that anybody asks for help. And so we can just be in anybody's school tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're one school or 1,000 schools, where it's 100% scalable. That's one of the really exciting things. Is we're about to announce a big partnership with a red state here coming up.
Okay.
I was hoping I could announce it on your show, actually.
Yeah. Oh, man.
But we weren't. We didn't have it ready. I guess what I can say today is that you and I are both in Texas, and this state is not Texas, and that's disappointing.
Yes.
Well, if Governor Abbott or your education commissioner is listening, we should be in your schools. We're moving states to the very top, very quickly.
And John, a couple of things. One is, Texas, if you are listening, we definitely need to be on board with this. Come on. But also, there are some other groups that have been working somewhere in this space. Like, do you know Bob Lawson and the folks at the SMU's Bridwell Center for Economic Freedom?
No, I don't. And I could hit SMU with a rock.
I know. Yeah. Well, you should definitely meet Bob Lawson. He's fantastic. He's a former guest. And Dean Stanzel, another former guest. They both work at SMU. And Ray Huell is the guy that works on this stuff. But it's called Teaching Free Enterprise in Texas. And now they've made it to where it's Teaching Free Enterprise. So they're doing this all across the country. But they've come up with units to teach labor market, which I wrote that unit. They have one on economic freedom. They have a number of different issues where they're teaching high school teachers about economics, so that way they can use it in their classroom with games and everything else. And it reminds me a lot of what you're doing with this middle school MBA. Just a different focus on high school compared to middle school, but there might be some good synergy between the two, especially since you're so close there, that we could bring it to Texas. And they're working with other states too, John, across the country, that maybe there's an opportunity to combine some of these things. Because one of the issues that I see happening, John, is that we're not teaching economics. We're teaching kind of the normative economics versus the positive economics. And we're not teaching the principles of economics that people can then use in their daily life. Because one of the things that I get a lot of pushback sometimes is they'll say, well, but economics, why do they really need to know that? In fact, there's a bill in Texas, given that we're both in Texas, that would remove economics being taught in high school and make it personal financial planning. And nothing wrong with personal financial planning, but I think having a sense of economics, if it's taught well in particular, but economics is much more broad, because the way that I like to define economics, John, is not the typical definition that we see in textbooks, like the Greg Mankiw textbook that many people use, that economics is the study of using scarce resources efficiently and effectively. That's essentially what it's been for so long.
Right.
But to me, then it becomes, well, who is using these resources? It's people. And it's also, how do you use them efficiently and effectively? Well, that's a long discussion as well. And while it's a little longer, my definition is economics is the study of human action and interaction within institutions to satisfy our desires given scarce resources. To me, that encompasses more of what's in economics. So it's not just the scarcity, efficiency, and all these other things. It really is about understanding people and their behavior and how we come together. That I think if more people understood it that way, we would understand economics much more than what's being taught in a lot of these classes. But what do you think about that?
No, I totally agree with you. I think it's very poorly taught. It's way too mathematized, and you frequently see these you see professors who come to believe that their models are the economy rather than attempts to represent the real economy. One told me one time that he was talking about the gold standards. Oh, you couldn't have a gold standard because then the value of money wouldn't be constant, and if the value of money isn't constant, then the models won't work.
Yeah,
I'm like, wait, we have to change reality to fit your model rather than the other way around. So yeah, I think we get kind of get lost in the trees and can't see the forest anymore.
Yep. Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I'm hopeful that things like what you're doing with Middle School MBA and teaching for enterprise and others can really start to set the stage. I mean, there's a lot of good work also done, as you probably know, the FEE, Foundation for Economic Education, sure. And they do a lot of great work as well. And I do think it needs to start early. I've also had Connor Boyack on from the Libertas Institute in Utah, but he's also the author of the Tuttle Twins. And my kids, my kids, they've been reading that now for years to kind of get in, and they're 7 and 10 now, but they've been reading this for a while, and so they're getting some really good insights on. In fact, this morning they were watching the Tuttle Twins before they went to school on Angel, the Angel app that we have, and I think it is important for us to start these lessons early because it is so important. When you watch the news, John, if we understood more about economics, we would understand the trade-offs. We would understand the opportunity costs. And I really believe that there is pressure to not teach as much economics, like we talked about this bill earlier in Texas, Absolutely. But there's other bills across the country to have us more ignorant about what's going on. And I don't know that it's necessarily nefarious where they want to force that on us, but that's the ultimate outcome. Is that these intentions of these or these policies have bad results, which is what Milton Friedman talked about. Don't judge a policy by its intentions, but by its results. And when we see these sort of things happening, I'm really worried about the future. I mean, one of the things I wanted to get in some discussion with you right now too is, we've got these tariffs, we've got protectionism, we've got, should we extend the Trump tax cuts later this year? What do we do about the deficit and debt? I mean, a lot of these are economic questions. Of course, it's a personal financial planning of how you're doing your own budget, but more from a macro area, the government is so large and infiltrated in so many areas of our lives that it makes it very difficult. If we don't understand economics and how these things fit together, how can we really understand how it's going to influence me as Vance Ginn or you as John Foster, right? And so I think it really must start early. But what has been your thoughts kind of about the economic situation we're in now, and maybe what you're hearing from maybe middle schoolers or the teachers, kind of piecing this in together, how it connects with the real economy versus just what's being taught in class?
Well, obviously our current situation is such a mixed bag. On the one hand, we I think for the first time in a long time, there really is a concerted effort to try and reduce government spending, and a
Yeah.
lot of support for it across the country. People by large margins say yes, cut spending, cut the waste. A real emphasis there. On the other hand, there's a lot of ignorance that's been recycled for a long time. Um, the tariffs. I mean, if it's a negotiating tactic, great. And if we ended up
Sure.
with lower barriers afterwards, that's great. But a lot of MAGA believes that tariffs make you prosperous, and I mean there are worse things to believe. Joe Biden was recycling the old war is good for the economy. Saying that
Right.
we need to send money to Ukraine because it's good for our economy. Uh,
Ah,
that's how bad it can get if people are sufficiently economically ignorant. And I
yep.
think yeah, it's so important for us to educate the Americans and the world about
Yeah.
these fundamental things of economics. And
Yeah.
if you wanted to cut something out of the schools, I think you could make a much stronger case that you're not going to use algebra in your life than you're not going to use economics.
Yeah.
The kids we teach, one sixth grade girl says to the other in the lunch line, "How much you think the markup is on what do you think the profit margin is on those Nutri-Grain bars?" That's somebody who's starting to look at the world in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you could cut out before you decide you want to cut out economics.
Yeah. Oh man, for sure, for sure. And it is interesting as one thing that I think economics also helps us do, John, is to look at the assumptions. Because one of the things that I like to do whenever I'm thinking about, okay, what are these trade barriers trying to do? Well, I went and studied and researched a lot of Peter Navarro's work in his book Death by China to figure out, okay, why does he believe the way he does? Because he's an economist who is advocating for tariffs and really believes that that's the way to go in order to balance trade, and also believes that trade deficits are bad and everything else. And whenever I started learning more about his work, it's more about an existential threat that he believes China is to America. And that's why he wants to use any tool necessary to go after them. Now, let's assume that's true for a second. I still don't think that tariffs are the right tool to use. I think that's that tariffs are a tax on Americans. I think we believe that, but many people don't understand that for some reason. But it's a tax on Americans to fund limited government, not to distort trade or anything else. I think if we are concerned about China, it probably should be more from the Department of Defense versus, and not saying go to war, but allowing for there to be discussions that are taking place compared with using economic tools that hurt Americans to do so, and changes the trade. And going back to the definition of economics earlier, it doesn't allow us to satisfy our needs as much as we otherwise would, because right now in the marketplace, we're choosing these things voluntarily. Whether it be to purchase something from China, you could try not to, even though it'd be difficult, but you could try not to buy something from China and other places. And that should be on the people, not people within government and bureaucrats. And so those trade-offs are really important. And so what are the trade-offs for some of those middle schoolers like you're bringing up earlier? I think if they understand more in economics, they would say, well, you know what? We're going to have to pay higher costs. And we may not have as much supply and therefore not as much competition. Because one of the things that was beautiful about Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and so forth was that when you expand trade, you expand the options for producers and consumers in a global market of 7 billion people compared to the domestic market of only 330 million people. And so it really is a picking winners and losers when you start going down this protectionist sort of direction. And what I've been arguing, John, is that I think speaking about lowering cost of doing business, is that we should be cutting our corporate income taxes. We should be cutting spending and cutting regulations. Get government out of the way. Don't put more of it into the system, because that's going to make the system worse. But I wonder kind of what your thoughts are on some of that stuff, or anything else you'd like to bring up.
No, I totally agree with you. The problem is the government. It's not. They started back in the 1920s, this whole thing, this idea of imperfect markets or imperfect competition and market failure. And I think market failure is an oxymoron. It doesn't happen. It's either the failure to have a market or some other interference in the market that causes what they're pointing at as market failure. And the way that we should be going is, I think the original concept of funding the federal government only with tariffs and with so if say we had a 5% flat tariff on everything that comes in the country, and then the federal government lived off of that, period. And whatever it had to do to live within those means, then you wouldn't have any direct taxation, and taxes would be lower, and we'd be super prosperous, and we could fund as much defense as we needed. I think Trump had a brilliant idea when he said, let's just go tell everybody, let's all cut our defense spending by 50%. We'll all be richer, and no one will be less at a disadvantage to anybody else. So I think there are a lot of creative things like that we could be doing that would just make us all much more prosperous. And we're missing a lot of opportunities by focusing on things like trade or acquiring Greenland or making Canada the 51st state. I mean, America has everything it needs. It just needs free markets. We came from a wilderness, I don't know, 200 years ago, and just surpassed the whole world. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And all of that was driven by free markets and small government.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Already.
Yeah, John. And one of the things I'm actually writing a piece right now on this, but I would argue that we've moved more towards socialism over the last century. And people want to blame free markets or blame classical liberalism or libertarianism. And I'm kind of like, okay, where's that been? I don't see that we've been in this capitalist utopia that maybe you or I would want. It's been much more of a mixed economy for a while, but I would say that it's moved more towards a socialist economy in too many respects. I mean, when you think about government spending as a share of GDP is over 30% when you include federal, state, and local spending. Our national debt, $36 trillion in deficits out as far as the eye can see. And when you look at healthcare, 60 cents of every dollar is spent by the taxpayer by government manipulation. Education is like 90% of every dollar is spent through taxpayer dollars going out into the economy. And you could go through the list. Transportation. I mean, a lot of this is dominated by government. It's not the free market capitalist system that we should hold dear. Even in Texas is heading too much in this direction as well. And I really blame that for the problems compared to trade with China or trade with Mexico. I think, and John, you may have heard me say this in some of my other episodes, but I usually say we're pointing our fingers at others, but we've got three more pointing back at ourselves. And until we get those problems right, we're not going to get the other one right either. And we're going to keep manifesting and creating larger government failure problems until we can get more in this direction. And that's why I really think this middle school MBA is just so important, John. And so I really appreciate our discussion today. Thank you for being on the Let People Prosper show. But I wanted to give you the last word. What would you like to say for the audience? And maybe hint at where they can find you, and I'll be sure to put that in the show notes page.
Okay, so finding us is easy. MiddleSchoolMBA.com. Couldn't be easier. Super easy to install too if you want to do it. And but I think Vance, one of the problems in what you were just talking about is people don't even know what that means, free markets. And one of the things we do, we do a lot of saying, a lot of our education is to say markets are better, markets are better. Look, they're better, which is great. But what we do in Middle School MBA is we actually show kids the exact mechanisms of how that works. Not just an assertion it's better, but look, here's how this machine works. And then when we talk about Marxism, we say, okay, so here are the Marxist tenets. And immediately they go, well, wait a second, if you don't have private property, how do you ever get price formation? And they know without prices, your businesses fail. So I think it's really important to get down to the nuts and bolts so that they know exactly what a market is and they can recognize market versus non-market transactions. Yeah. And so that's one of the things we try to do. But really, really appreciate you having me on today. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, I agree. And I look forward to all the success you have with this. Let me know how I can help along the way. It's a really good opportunity. So thank you so much, John, for being on the show, and God bless you. And I look forward to talking to you more soon.
Thank you, Vance.
Awesome. Well, for the audience, thank y'all for joining us today. I hope that you'll go and check out middleschoolmba.com. I'll put in the show notes page as well. But it's really important that we understand economics. Too little of economics is being taught in the right way these days, and we're missing out on how it really influences our lives and tells us about the world in which it works. And so I hope you will go and find more of this information there on my website and other places, because we really do need to learn more about economics. So with all that said, thank you for joining me today. Remember, you can find more information about me at vanceginn.com or go to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. And until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.